or picture design for the breadboard. And as I was doing all of the step-by-step assembly instructions, I had on a monitor, besides the camera view, this image. And so this image is really what you can use to make your assembly go a lot smoother, because these wires are not color-coded by length, they're color-coded by function connectivity. So you see, for example, that the red wire goes to the red LED, the red wire goes to the red LED, and then red wire connections are going to sometimes going to the VCC or the voltage connection. Black wire connections are going to ground. And then each of the switches has a different color. Each of the switch wires, I should say, has a different color. So you kind of see where they originate from as a switch and then where they terminate into the ESP32. So this is something which I'll put in the beginning of the step sequence so that you know that it's there, but it's also going to be available as a static image that you can have either printed or on your computer monitor, and that will help you as well guide to the assembly of the overall process. What you see on the camera now is two controllers, ESP32 controllers for the Tello drone. And the next series of clips that I'm going to make will show how to assemble one of these from scratch. So this is the model we're going to build against. We're going to use that as our goal, and then this is the finished product that will be built step by step by step. This one has basically the same wire colors and switches and LEDs and resistors that are going to be in the kit that anybody would receive from me. So without further ado, I'm going to disassemble this one, and then gradually we're going to build it up from scratch. So now I've disassembled the controller that I showed you in the previous segment. And then I'm also including the out-of-the-box state for the resistors and the LEDs. There's 6 blue ones and 6 brown colored body ones, and those go, as you'll see on the breadboard, for switches and LEDs. The LEDs come in the longer lead format here, and the longer lead is the positive side of the LED, the shorter lead is the negative side of the LED. And once we trim these wires down so they fit snugly on the breadboard, it will not be easy to tell which side is positive and which side is negative. But I'm going to show you a little balancing trick that allows us to know what side is negative and what side is positive once the leads are trimmed. So we have 12 red wires, 2 inches long. We have 6 switches that plug into the breadboard. We have some short gray wires and maybe some slightly longer bluish wires. The colors in the kit might not be exactly these colors. And then we have some longer wires over here that are used to connect the switches. The green ones will nominally be 5 inches, and there's 2 blue ones which are basically 6.5 inches or so. This is the ESP32 which comes in the kit. This is the battery that will power the ESP32 when it's acting as a controller. There is a chip that plugs into the breadboard that is the MPU. This is a gyroscope accelerometer piece built into this. And then this other little board is an OLED display so that it can display characters, which we'll see when the controller is running. So we have to put all of these things together on the breadboard in order to achieve the controller hardware. So the next step is to actually look at trimming the leads of the resistors and the LEDs, and then once we have those leads trimmed, we can start to do the actual assembly. Now we're at the point where I want to show the process of trimming the resistor leads down. So we have the 2 different kinds of resistors. I'm just going to show one of them live here, trimming it down, because all of the resistors, all 12 of them, act exactly the same. So let me take the blue one off. And then for the brown one, I'm just going to cut one of the resistors away, and this is just paper. I'll put the other 5 away. And then what you want to do now is just get rid of that paper. You don't need that anymore. And then the resistor just looks like that. And don't want it to fall down. And so what I'm going to do as a guide here is I'm going to take a pencil. I'm going to take the resistor body and I'm going to hold it on top of the pencil with my thumb. And then I'm going to bend the leads down over the pencil. So just like that. I just held it down and I bent it over the pencil. So that's about the right bend you want for the circuit board for all 6 resistors. They're all the same. So now I have the resistor with the pins bent, and then I want to leave enough to plug into the breadboard. So what I'm suggesting is about 3/8 of lead. So if you see on the thing there, you know, I have an inch of lead, and I don't want that. I want to end up with about 3/8. So that's about right there. So let me, again, I don't need the ruler. I'm going to eyeball this. Now you do need a wire cutter, a wire snipper. So that's about 3/8 there, I think. So maybe it's can make it a little, better to be a little longer than a little shorter. So I'm going to cut that one with my cutter, and then there's the piece that's left. And then I'm going to cut the same size, the same length away on the other side. Then there's the piece that I cut, and then there's the resistor. That's what it should look like. It should look about that long when you have finished trimming the resistor. So you do all 6 resistors exactly the same way, and then I'm going to assume that that's something which everybody can do now. You've seen it done once. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go on to trimming the LED leads, and then discover the trick to know which is positive and which is negative then. Previous step segment I was talking about resistors, and I said 6 resistors. There's 12 resistors altogether, 6 of each color. So all of them get trimmed down the way that I showed in the previous step for the 1. So now we're going to look at trimming the LEDs. So now I have one of the LEDs that was already trimmed. And in fact, if I try to move it around, it rolls to the point where it's lying with one of the leads facing up. And that is the flat side is on the surface, and the flat side is the negative part of the LED. So if I, again, moving it around, it wants to come back to that vertical position. The one that's on top, not next to the table, that's the positive lead. So again, once we've trimmed them, then that's the way that you tell that the leads are oriented positively or negatively. And the negative side of the LED, which is the one that's next to the table here, that's the side that gets connected to the resistors on the breadboard. So again, that's the trimmed one, and then here is the blue, one of the blue ones untrimmed. And again, if I just kind of roll this around, it wants to balance on the negative end. So the longer lead side is on top, and the shorter lead side is down below. So now I'm going to take the LED, and I'm going to show that I want about 3/8 of an inch below this little bend in the wire. There's a little flattened part of the wire right outside of the bulb of the LED. And I want to have a length of LED about 3/8 of an inch from there. It should be about the same between what's leading into the bulb and what's leading away from the bulb. I don't want the entire length because then everything is too loose. So it's about 1/4 of an inch or 3/8 of an inch, something on that in that area. So again, you can trim these just with an ordinary wire cutter, and you can line that up. I think that's about right. Again, err a little bit on longer rather than shorter. So that looks to be about a good length. And now I'm going to cut the one, and then that's lying on the table there. And now I'm going to cut the other the same length. You want them to be the same length because you want them to go into the breadboard evenly. So now I have the blue one. Of course, this one's getting a little bit harder to balance, but there it is, it balanced. So now that one means that the side with the lead next to the table is the negative one, and the one that's away from the table is the positive one. So again, if it locks into place like that, then you know the negative one is down below, and then the positive one is up on top. There's also a little bit of a lip around the bulb, and then you can kind of feel it with your finger where the flattened side is. Very hard to show that on camera. So that's why I'm using the balancing trick to show you negative versus positive. So all 6 LEDs need to be trimmed in exactly this way. And so you should do that before you get started with the rest of the circuit board or printed board, breadboard assembly. Now we're ready to get started with placing the components down on the breadboard and then wiring them up with the various wires. So again, this is the finished goal. This is our target concept. And we want to kind of put the pieces down in this order, going left to right. First the ESP32, then the 2 rows of LEDs, then the NPU board chip, then the OLED board chip, and then the 6 switches. So I am going to probably do the parts up to the switches as one video segment and then do the switches as a separate segment. So I'm going to take the finished product off the stage. There is the blank breadboard, and then this is the ESP32. You want the USB side on the left, and then you want to line it up so that the first pin goes into the first hole, and you have 1 row of holes exposed on the breadboard. And then once you have that aligned, you can carefully press it down, and then you have this arrangement. There's 2 rows of holes that are open on top, but there's only 1 row of holes that are open on the bottom. Then you want to count 2 spaces over, 2 columns over, 1, 2, and then that's where you start to place the LEDs down. So again, I'm going to do this right away. The first one is going to be a red one, and I want to get the negative side onto the right. So I'm going to use the middle row, count 2, 1, 2, and I'm going to put it down there. So that's the red one, and then on the bottom, the next one is going to be yellow. And again, I'm using the roll trick to get the negative one to be on the bottom, and then I'm going to put the yellow one down, and then I'm going to use the roll trick again. Oopsie. There it is. So that's the negative side on the bottom, so I'm going to put that next to the yellow one. Now to do the same thing on top, where we do the red one, and I'm going to just make sure that I have this one. It's rolling too much. I believe that's right. So that's on the right side is where the negative is. So I want to go on the top two notches over, and then the blue one's in the middle. So I believe I have there it is. So that's the negative side on the bottom. So I'm going to put that next to the red one. And then I'm going to do the green one, and it looks like, again, these are running into each other. I think that's negative on the bottom now. So again, if I orient this right, I'm going to put the green one next to the blue one. So again, you have to arrange them. It's a little tight, but you can get them in there, one next to another. Again, you're making sure that there's 2 2 columns of holes that are not being used. Then you want to have 1 row not being used, and then you want to put this chip down. And again, now you're going to use the second row. So I want one exposed. So you want to just kind of seat that right into where you have 1 column of holes exposed, and then you want that to be counting three rows, 1, 2, 3 on top. I moved my switches out of the way. And then the last thing to do right now before we start the switches is to put the OLED display. And there's only 4 pins that you have to push in, but you want to leave again one space. So you want to leave that 1 space of holes between everything else. So that's where I am now before the switches. And the switches are a little bit more delicate, so I'm going to do that in a separate segment. So let me stop this step segment. Here we are where I left off, having placed all of those components up to the switches. And now I want to put the switches into the circuit board too. So once you get the orientation right, everything is pretty straightforward. I'm just going to use this tweezers to hold it. And so you can see the claws on the switch. And there's two ways to do that, where the claws are going left to right or the claws are going up and down. You want this claws to be going up and down. And then all 6 switches get placed into the breadboard with the same positioning. So I'm going to do it by hand because many of you will not have the tweezers. So I'm going to go over to the right side, and the first one is going to straddle the middle partition, this hole, so that that one is now placed on, and they should go in pretty readily. Be careful not to bend the pins as you're putting them in. And then these ones on the in this arrangement, this diamond arrangement, need to not have any spare columns in between. So this next one is going to go at the top. Again, I'm trying to get this exactly, just using my hands. And that was, so I put that down, but that's wrong. There's an extra row of holes. So I need to move it over one. So, and again, you want, for these next two, you want to have a blank set of holes below where you put the switch. So now you want to align the other one exactly the same way, but on the bottom. So again, you can eyeball the fact that they look vertically aligned, and there isn't any extra row of holes between them. And then the next one is at the same middle position with no extra holes between the two vertical ones. So again, it's a little bit hard without the tweezers to place it, but I think I got that one down right now. So there is the fourth switch. So I got 1, 2, 3, 4, and now you want to have 2 empty holes positioned. So 1, 2 empty ones, and then you want to put the switch again towards the top, but with 2 rows of holes there. So did I count right there? Yes, I did count right. So 1, 2 rows of holes. Then that switches down, and then now I can do the other one vertically aligned with that one, the one that I just placed. And now all 6 switches are there. And you kind of push them down with your hands. Make sure you can push in on the switch, and then they're not going to be they can come out. I mean, as you use the controller to fly the Tello drone, things can get loose, but you can just push them back down again. So now I have all of the major pieces arranged across. And so the next thing to do is to do the resistors, then the little wires, then the big wires, and then we're done. Now we're going to place the resistors, and we'll do the bottom ones first along the bottom side of the breadboard as it's facing me, and then that's 6 altogether, 3 browns and 3 blues. And then I'll stop the video recording, do another segment where we're going to do them on the top, but I'll switch the board around so it's easier to see what's going on there. Now here, to make things just a little bit easier on me with my hands, I am going to use the tweezers. And you can do it by hand, but you have to just be a little careful. The first one of these, you should count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then it's the black side, the brown side, and then it's just vertically arranged to go up to the pin below the ESP32. And so that's the first one. And then the second one is going to be right next to it, but I don't have enough, I don't have a hole right there. So I have to actually bridge it from the hole over to get to the ESP32. So again, I'm using this tweezers just as an ease of placement. You can do it by hand. You just have to be a little careful, a little delicate. There's no polarity on the resistors. You don't have to worry about where the stripes go. And then again, it's the next one gets right next to the previous one, and I have to be a little bit on an angle because there wasn't a hole there. So now that's 3 of the resistors for the switches. They have to be the brown ones. Don't get the colors mixed up. And then now I'm going to do the 3 blues for the lower set of LEDs. Now the LEDs are positive, negative. That's why you did that roll trick. But the resistors, again, aren't. And you want to be to the right side of each pair of LED leads. So there I go. I got that one in, and I can push it down all the way. There it goes. Again, so it's the positive is not resistored. The negative is resistored. And then now I skip a hole, and then I'm going to do the same thing with the yellow. And then push it down and get it in, and then I'm going to do the last one, which is the green, and I'm going to put that next to the, again, skip a hole, and then I'm going to try to use the hole that's actually there. So I'm just going to push it down there, and I think that's good. So there you go. So you skip a hole from the red, then resistor, skip a hole, then resistor for yellow, skip a hole, then resistor for green, and then you put those into the bottom row of holes here. You don't use the red side, you use the black or blue side to get those in. So let's stop this segment, and then I'm going to turn the board around and do the other 6 resistors. I'm going to place the resistors on the other side, and I rotated the board around. I had started to do the recording, and then I realized that some of these resistor leads were not quite aligned properly, so I went and rebent them to make sure that they're stable. So let's start with the LED ones, the blue ones, and again the resistor goes to the cathode side of the LED, and now on this side it's on the left of the LED. So I'm going to put this one down first. There you go. So that one's down. That's the left side of the green LED. That's where the negative side is. Then I'm going to grab the next one, and then I got to count 1 over, so I have to be here, and then I can just go directly down because there is a hole that I can directly place the other part of the resistor in, and then I count 1 hole over, and then again I'm grabbing the tweezers, and I'm going to put it down. I'm skipping a hole. I'm going to go right down into the breadboard right at that side of the LED. So those are all placed, and now I want to place the resistors for the switches which go into the ESP32. So now I have to count some pins, and there's a pin here which corresponds to that row, and there's a pin there which corresponds to that row, and then the next one over is where I place a resistor. So the first 2 don't have resistors, so not, but then this one does. And so again I have to be slightly at an angle because there's no hole directly below the pin, so I would be thinking I'd be placing it there, but there's no hole there. Then I keep the next resistor in line with that one. I don't skip any holes at the ESP32 end, but now I do have a hole that I can use for placing the resistor. So now that resistor is down, and then now I have to skip a row, so I don't do the very next connection. I do 1 over from there. So I'm skipping a hole, and then I'm putting the resistor down right there. I'm going to finish with my hands. So I'm skipping a place. Now the other hole in the ESP32 is going to get used for a wire, but not one that's connected to a resistor side. So now I've placed all 6 resistors. And so this is the end of this step segment. We're going to try to put wires on the board, and we're going to start with the wires that affect the switches. So let's do the switch wires first, and then I'll do the other short wires that are up on here. So as you can see, we're sometimes having to bend around the switch in order to connect the pin to red, to the voltage rail. So the red is closer to the switches on the bottom, and it's farther away on the switches on the top, so that complicates routing a little bit. But let's see if we can give it a go. So again, I have all 6 switches unconnected. I'm going to start with one of these switches. I'm going to go to the pin up here. I'm going to find the pin going into red right there, and then I think I can just push this in to make the connection. Let's see. There we go. So that one is connected. Switch is still connected. And then I'm going to do the same thing for this one, bending the gray wire just a little bit to have room. and then I'm going to bend it around the switch and have it go into the red rail right there. So both of those switches are where they're supposed to be, connecting to the pins at the top of the switch. Now I'm going to do the pins up here. So let's see if I can get this one right. I'm going to go down there, and I'm going to get up to where the red is and make that fit. And I did. There we go. Those two switches are connected. And then this one here, I still need to connect. And I have this is a different color, but it's basically the same length. And there's red to red. And so now I have those switches all connected. And then I still have two more connections to make. These two switches are not connected yet, right here and right there. So I can use slightly shorter wires to accomplish that. So, in fact, I can go from there to there. Yes, that works. And then I have another one of these slightly shorter wires. Your kit will have some shorter wires and some wires that are a little longer. And I will connect red to the pin, and then that is the switch wire connection. So all 6 of the switch pins have a corresponding wire connecting it to the red side of the breadboard, either on top or on the bottom. Now the other connections I need to make are the VCC and ground for the OLED, and the VCC and ground for the MPU, the accelerometer chip. So I'm going to use slightly smaller versions of the wires. There should be some smaller versions in your kit that you would use for this purpose. And so ground needs to go to black or blue. So there's ground, and I'm using the tweezers to help me. And then that's ground on the OLED display, and then now ground on the accelerometer is going to be done similarly. Let's see if I line this up correctly. That looks to be ground. I'm going to release the tweezer. So ground, then those are going to the blue side, the black side, or blue or black, not the red side. And then what's called VCC or VDD, I guess it's VCC here in these two chips. That's what needs to go for connecting to red. So I can use red up there, and I can make sure that this goes into the red side. There it goes. And then do it one more time for the VCC side of the accelerometer MPU. So again, this is, because these wires are a little smaller, I'm relying on the tweezers to give me some ability to place. So if you don't have a tweezers, you're just going to have to use your fingers and just be a little careful. So I placed it there, then I pushed it with my finger. So it looks like VCC is going to red, ground is going to ground, VCC is going to red, and ground is going to ground. And I have all of the switches that need to be wired up with those short wires. So that's the end of this step segment. There are 4 more wires that relate to power and ground, and 2 of them are going to be from the ESP32 to red and ground on this side, and then I need to bridge from the red rail to the red rail up here and the ground rail to the ground rail up there using some longer wires. So I'm using the same gray wires that I was using for the switches, but I bent them in kind of a funny way so that I can reach from the pin down to the breadboard. So I'm going to go to the, now here it is, I'm using the second pin in, and that's going to be my voltage connection to the entire circuit. So the second pin hole I'm going to use for a wire, and then I'm going to connect that to positive, to the red rail. So if I get this lined up right, I can just push those down into place, and then that's the power connection to the circuit board for the controller. Then I skip a pin, and then the 4th pin I'm going to use for ground connection. So that goes from the 4th pin down to the black rail. So if I bend this wire slightly, I can get this to the ground, and I can get this to the second pin, and then this fits right in as the connection to the to ground. So red goes to second pin, black ground goes to fourth pin, or hole. And then I have to bridge those connections up to the upper side of the breadboard, up from down here to up there. So I'm going to do that with these two of these red longer wires. They're all the same length. So I'm going to go from this pin position, and I have a little bit of play here, so I can go all the way over here and just bend it around. And get that slightly over. In fact, maybe what I'll do, since that's a little bit of a stretch, I'm going to change my mind and go to here instead. So let's see if I can raise this up slightly and then get the pin to seat itself into red. So now I have a little bit of an extra wire there, or extra length, but at least both sides are solidly connected. And I need to do the same thing for ground, connecting from the bottom to the top. So I've got to find a ground position here, and I guess it doesn't really matter too much which one I use. I'm going to try this one, and then I'm going to go to one of the ground positions. And let's see, do I have enough room to go to that one? Let's see if I can make that work. Make this pin go into the, again, am I on a hole or not? I am not on a hole. So now I need to be on a ground rail connection hole. And what's happened here is some of these wire ends are bending a little bit, and so they're having a little bit of a tough time getting into the hole. So I'm using my thumb to get that one down into the hole, and then I'm going to smooth this over slightly since I have a little bit of space, and then I'm going to get that one down into the ground hole. So ground is going up to ground. Let me get my pointer. Ground is going up to ground, and BCC here is going up to BCC there. So now that completes the power connections for the breadboard. So what I now need to do is, first of all, I'm going to do the cross wires from what are labeled SDA, SCL on the two bigger chips, and then a relay from there to each SDA to SDA, SCL to SCL, and then relay from that over to the ESP32. I'm going to do that in another step segment. So now we're going to start to do some of the cross wiring, and we'll start with a relay that I need to set up between SDA on the OLED and SDA on the MPU, SCL on the OLED to SCL on the MPU, and then from SDA to SDA on the ESP32 and SCL to SCL on ESP32. SDA is on the top right. That's what SDA's connection is, and SCL is the pin right next to the top right, so immediately to the left. So as we make those final connections, SDA will be going from here to where it is on the MPU, which is right there, and then SCL will be going from this pin to SCL, which is on the other side of the SDA connection on the MPU. So let's start it with the OLED, and I have two wires here that are kind of almost in a U shape already because I have extra space to play with here. So I'm going to go on the SDA connection, which is right there, and go to the SDA connection, which is right here, and get that into the hole there. There we go. So that's into there, and then I can do SCL to SCL. So SCL is on the inside boundary here. It's to the left of SDA on this side, and it's to the right of SDA on that side. So these connections are now in place, and then I'll use these other two wires to connect from the ESP32 to this side. I don't need to go anywhere else but to the MPU. So I'll start with a connection to SDA, And I'll make the wire kind of point down here into SDA. This SDA is this one. It's the one on the other side, and then that goes to the rightmost pinhole on the ESP32. So I've made that connection there, and then I need to go from SCL, which is to the right of SDA. So I place that one, and then he needs to go into the next pin position, the next hole position on the ESP32. So if I got this lined up correctly, I can push the that wire in, and then now these are both connected properly. There's a little bit less slack for these connections, and there's a little bit more slack for the other ones. But that's what actually shows the relay connection, SDA to SDA, SDA to the ESP32, SCL to SCL, SCL to the SCL side of the ESP32. Now we're ready to start tackling the major wiring, which is for the LEDs and for the switches. And we're going to do that counterclockwise, starting on the top row of the ESP32 pins, and then when we're done with that, we're going to pick up connections on the bottom row of the ESP32 pins. So let's start a new step segment for that, and we'll be doing things on the top first. Getting to the home stretch, we have 12 wires yet to connect. 6 wires for switch connections and 6 wires for LED connections. And we're going to move across the top, starting to the left of SCL, and go down. They're all connected in a row here, and then we're going to move to the bottom. I'll do a separate steps video segment for the bottom and the top, so let's do the top first. And the very first one to the left of SCL is going to be connected to a switch, and that switch, the one I want to connect first, is this switch right here, the bottom one here, which is the down button, as it turns out. So I can use a green wire length to make that connection, and I'm going to route it around this switch so that I have the, kind of some room. I'm going to place it down, and then I just basically got to go all the way up and connect that to the ESP32. So that is the first connection I'm going to make, and then the next connection I'm going to make is for this switch, the one on all the way to the right, but the green should be enough of a length to make that happen. So I am going to plug in the whole, I've got a little bit of caught there. I'm going to plug into that switch, which is connected through the breadboard vertically to this switch, and then I'm going to make it pass around here, and then make it be connected to, I can grab it here, this particular position on the ESP32. So again, there's a little bit of a stretch here to make that happen, and one thing that maybe what I can do to make it a little bit tighter is to take off this small switch. Let's remove that, take off this small switch wire, not switch, but the wire itself, and then put the connection underneath of it. Let me get rid of the tweezers. Connect to the connection underneath of it. Get that in there. Come on now. There you go. And then put the wire back on to kind of help keep that stabilized. If you have enough room to do that, that's something that you might want to do when you're putting your own kit together, to have that extra, lockdown. In fact, it kind of moved it off there, but now it's kind of locking that connection down. So those two switches are now connected, and then the next thing is a connection, but it's to an LED, not to a switch. And the LED that I'm going to connect to is the yellow one on the lower row. So I'm going to connect the LED on the lower row. Now again, the right side of the LED is ground, so it's the other side that I want to make the connection to. So that's right there. And then I want to connect that. I'll keep the wire routed inside of the shell here of the ESP32. And then now I'm putting that particular connection into the pin. So that is the yellow plus side of the LED on the bottom row connected to that pin. And then the next one of these is again a switch connection. And this switch connection is the one right here, the leftmost one on the top. So again, I find where I have room, which is below the switch, and then I go and connect that to the switch on the, the pin next to the one I just used. So I have to be careful not to skip. So that's the one that I just used. That is again a switch connection. Kind of make them be kind of as flat as you can. And then the last connection I need to make is from the red LED on the bottom to the pin right to the left of the one that I just connected. So again, I'm using a red connection wire. I'm going to the see if I can poke that down into there. I'm going to just find where that pin location is, right there, and then I want to connect that to the pin on the ESP32 right to the left of where that switch connection was just made. So again, I can bend those so that they are pretty well self-contained inside of the body of the ESP32. So that completes the top row. So we have SDA, SCL, 2 switches, an LED, a switch, and an LED. So I'm going to stop this video segment and then we'll continue on the bottom row next. We have, I guess, 7 connections to make still. This is the final wire connection piece that we need to do. We're going to connect right across the bottom row. We're going to do, I think, 6 in a row. Yes, 6 in a row, and then we're going to skip a bunch of pins that we're going to leave empty, and then the last connection we make is to the rightmost pin on the bottom part of the ESP32. So we start to the immediate right of the ground connection outwards from the ESP32, and we're going to use a red wire to connect to the top red LED. So again, I'm going to use and again to the positives are to the left and the negatives are to the right. So I'm plugging into the positive side and I'm connecting that to the pin that's available on the ESP32. If I can find where the hole is. I plugged into the hole, but then I lost the connection on the breadboard. So I'm going to plug it back into the breadboard. So again, if you kind of just bend these down to give a little bit of pressure downwards. So that's number 1. And then the next connection is also to an LED. It's going to be to the blue LED. Again, the positive side of blue is going to go to this next pin connection. We use a short wire for that, short red wire. And so I'm going to go, let's try it the other way. We'll start to connect on the ESP32 side, and then, bend the wire over, find where I can plug into the breadboard, and then that seems to fit pretty well. And then now we're going to do some connections to the switches. So the first one we're going to connect to is the switch that's all the way over here. This switch hasn't been connected yet, and I need a kind of a slightly longer wire than the green wire. I just noticed this one of these things has popped out. So we're going to, you pay attention to this after a while, looking for where the wires have lost their stickiness into the holes. Maybe they could be a little bit thicker. So again, I'm going to go to this switch, that switch there, and I'll start it with connecting again at the ESP32 side, and then I'm going to bend this blue switch around and come up between the switches and get connected up here. If I found that connection properly, I think that's it. So the connection is to the top switch, this switch, and then I'm going underneath and going all the way over to where I can get the connection in to the ESP32. Now that's kind of a little bit covering up the hole I want to use. So let me see if I can bend it out. Well, I can bend it out of the way when I connect a wire. So the next one also requires the slightly longer wire. So I'm going to bend that wire a little bit out of the way here and get my connection into the place on the ESP32. And then this one is going to go to this switch right there. And I'm going to route this a little bit differently. I'm going to go kind of under the OLED and then get to where I can connect that in. So I can do it right here. Maybe if I was using the tweezers, it would be a little bit easier. So I have a little bit more capacity here. The wire is more than long enough to make that routing choice around the other switches. And then the last connection in a row here is to another switch, but it's the one on the lower left. So again, I find where I can connect that into the ESP32, which is the next pin over. Get that down there. And then again, I need to kind of get where the blue wire just went. Maybe I should have done them a slightly different order, but let's see if I can make some room. And then go into the switch here. So that's the green wire going from the ESP32 kind of around the OLED display and then into the position where I'm connecting it. Now I'm looking here across the switches, and all of them seem to still have wires connected to the ESP32. None of them have popped out. The next connection on the ESP32 is again well, actually the next two are both OLED connections. The one to the immediate right here, this switch is going to go to the green LED on the bottom. So again, finding the hole here for the green LED, it's right there. And then I'm going to connect that into the ESP32 at that position, and I can kind of just bend that out of the way. And then one final wire, which is the end of the assembly. And this one goes from, again, I skip all of the pins that are to the right now until I get to the very last one. And then that one is the one that goes and connects to the green that belongs to the upper part of the LED space. So I'm going to plug that into again, the blue one popped out on me. I just caught that just now. And then now I'm going to plug into the green, and then this goes, and this is kind of where I could really use a shorter wire going into the last pin on the ESP32. So looking across the wiring diagram here, maybe I'll have another step where I do an examination of the connections that we've made. But the switches are all there. They still seem to have good solid connection to the breadboard. The little wires are there. The cross wires are there. And then all of the LED positive connections have been made to the ESP32. And so it looks like that's where we want it to be.